Kelly Ford, KFord Ratings on X, KFordRatings.com, on your radio talking college football. Kelly, welcome in, brother. How you doing?
Hey, Jake, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I appreciate you. And look, I know that we're not going to change what I'm fixing to bring up. I do it every year. But why do we want to continue to believe that coaches vote in a coaches poll?
Well, I don't know, Jake. I mean, as we've talked about, coaches poll, AP preseason poll, I don't put much stock in either of those things because there's even among the voters not a set criteria of how are we supposed to be voting? What are we voting on? Are we voting on, who we think is going to be the best this year? Are we voting on who we think is going to have the best record? Are we voting on, based on how good these teams were last year and what we think we might expect to be coming back this year? There's really not a lot of merit, in my opinion, in doing coaches or AP type polls in the preseason because we haven't seen any. We have these polls that are trying to project forward, but then once we get going, they shift and they become a merit poll, right? So I don't really believe in preseason polls. Preseason power ratings, of course, is one thing, and that's something that I dabble in as we know now. But, coaches polls, AP preseason poll, I don't even pay it much attention, Jake, because I don't even think they know what they're voting on amongst themselves.
Kelly Ford talking college football, Monday edition of the program. I agree with you 100% on that. And, I think the college football playoff committee, and, I was talking to Chris Landry about this yesterday, is, why do we still need a committee? But that's neither here nor there because the NFL doesn't have a committee. High school football doesn't have a committee. So, but for some reason we still have to have it in Division I college football. But even they got rid of the coaches and the Associated Press in relationship to what they do with figuring out the entire playoff.
Yeah, without a doubt. Again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If we want to talk about, what a power rating is for teams moving forward, that certainly does make sense. But I'm not a supporter of anything that changes throughout the course of the year what it is you're objectively trying to quantify. And yeah, as we get in the BCS era, they do away with certain things. Now we have the CFP selection committee that does their ranking at the end, but there's a reason that group doesn't get together until November or the end of October, because then we have a sufficient amount of games under our belt to really truly rate teams or judge teams on what have they achieved this year relative to what would be expected given the schedule played.
All right, week one, I'm looking at some of your notes here as you look at, team watchability. So you've got USC, looks like teams with highest average watchability scores for all regular season games. Define again for the audience what watchability is the way you frame it up means.
For sure. So watchability has nothing to do with what I'm projecting TV ratings to be, the number of eyeballs on that, or how big a certain team's fan base is, how popular a brand is. Nothing to do with any of that. When I say watchability on the website, KFordRatings.com, it is a weighted score of projected quality. So what's the average KFord rating of the two teams involved? And competitiveness. So what's the KFord spread of the game? Those are the only two things that I'm looking at. Is it high quality teams and is it projected to be a close game? When I do that for all 134 FBS teams and every single game they play, I'm able to come up with a score of 0 to 10 for every single one of their games, and then you average those together, and that's how you can figure out who has the highest watchability by that metric in college football. And for me, it's USC that comes out with an 8.77. So over the course of their 12 regular season games, USC averages an 8.77 on a 0 to 10 scale with regard to each of their games when we're looking at just the quality of the teams involved and the projected competitiveness of those games. Florida, Alabama, LSU, and Oklahoma State round out the top five for me in terms of average watchability.
I mean, look, if you just look through their schedule, you look at USC, you just kind of do a little homework here, and it takes just a second. I mean, LSU, that game with LSU week one, it could be the biggest game that weekend, simply because, I mean, you could argue some others as well, but because of, the projection, I mean, we just had an offensive tackle for LSU said, hey, it's national championship time for them down there. USC wants to, prove, I think, that they belong in this race. So that's a big game. Utah State, not so much, but then they go to Michigan. They host Wisconsin. They'll have Penn State coming in 2 weeks after that. They will play a Rutgers team that should be pretty salty at Washington, which is a natural rivalry of sorts. Nebraska, that still has somewhat of a brand there as well. Of course, at UCLA and Notre Dame. So I could see where that kind of calculates out because most of their ball games are maybe not like taking on Georgia every week or Texas every week, but the potential eyeballs and the brands are there.
For sure. Yeah, 4 games on USC's schedule against teams power rated in the top 12 of my preseason ratings. There's only 2 games on the schedule against teams power rated outside the top 50. And when you combine that with the fact that I have USC right there at number 20, you could say, okay, the average quality of these games is going to be pretty high with teams, power rated in the top 50 almost exclusively. And then with USC being 20, they're going to be, pretty close to teams above them or below them with regard to projected spread. Of course, you're adjusting for home field advantage and all those things. But that's how USC is going to come out with, on average, an 8.77, even though they don't play, as you said, some of the marquee teams on a week-in, week-out basis. But this is a difficult schedule. It's number 14 most difficult in the entire country by my numbers. And you mentioned that week 1 game against LSU. I've got that with a watchability score of 9.6. Again, it's on a 0 to 10 scale. So a 9.6 for the Trojans right out of the gate. For me, Jake, that's the number 2 game of week 1 behind Notre Dame at Texas A&M, which I have it as a 9.8 watchability score.
I want to come back to Notre Dame because of a piece that was out on them earlier. But first, let me ask you about Alabama. Now, Florida, that makes sense. We know about their schedule. It's lights on them every week. Alabama, is it more about who they play, or is this more about the Alabama brand?
So for Alabama, just like for everybody, it's a combination, right? It's because of how good Alabama's projected to be, number 5 in my power ratings. So really, really good team, even though there's a post-Nick Saban era. But also it's who they're playing. It's the top 10 most difficult schedule in the country. They've got Georgia in conference, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn. All of those teams are top 25 in the power ratings. You throw in a non-conference game against Wisconsin. So when you're looking at watchability, again, for me, it's an average, a weighted average, not equal, a weighted average of the quality of the teams involved. So certainly Alabama's the quality, and then most of their opponents are pretty high quality. And then what's the projected spread? Alabama doesn't grade out quite as well there because they are going to be, a significant favorite, I would say, in many of their games. But you look at the Georgia game, the Tennessee game, the LSU game, the Oklahoma game, all of those games should have a single-digit spread, maybe even a one-possession spread. And so they're going to get almost max credit for each of those games, and that's about a third of their schedule right there.